another issue. It's been just 2 weeks since negotiators released what could only be called a farce of a proposal to require the labeling of genetically engineered foods. Less than a week after it was released, without any committee action, no testimony, no recorded feedback from either proponents or opponents, the Senate Majority Leader filed cloture on a privileged vehicle to fast-track this bill. Gone are the promises of regular order. Gone are the pledges of an open amendment process. Instead, the Senate will now consider whether to preempt carefully considered, long-debated state laws to protect and enforce a consumer's right to know. And make no mistake, Vermont's first in the nation GE labeling law is what's under attack here. Vermont's carefully debated law from our little state is this threat that has driven millions of dollars in lobbying to the door of the United States Senate. And these millions of dollars of lobbying seem to be paid off because suddenly, with all the problems facing America, we don't have our appropriations bills done, we don't have money for Zika, we can't do anything about the sale of high-powered weapons to gangs that then use them to shoot innocent people. We can't face up to any of these things, but the lobbyists say, change all the rules, ignore all the precedent, forget the pledges you've made, let's just zip through and get this bill done because we want it. Well, you know, there's probably, people should wonder why the Congress can be in such disfavor of the American people. What this bill does not consider is that 9 out of 10 consumers support a mandatory GE label on their food products. What this bill does not recognize is that 64 countries around the world mandate GE labeling. This bill does not benefit from a thorough, open, constructive debate, but it apparently has benefited by millions and millions of dollars of lobbying and campaign contributions. I was here in March when the Senate voted convincingly to reject the DARK Act. Well, what we have today, a rebooted DARK Act. It makes some modest improvements, but it falls far short of the disclosure that consumers demand, Vermonters are required. It does not have the disclosure that 9 out of 10 consumers say they want. I mean, what we're saying is we'll listen to a handful of very well-financed lobbyists and campaign contributors, but we won't listen to 9 out of 10 of the American people. And I've heard from hundreds of Vermonters about this so-called mandatory labeling bill. For the benefit of the Senate's short record on this issue, I'd like to take this opportunity. I'm going to share with the Chamber some of the messages I've received in the past few weeks. Incidentally, this is a map of our state, and it shows, the dots show where I've heard. Many have shared their concerns about a digital or electronic disclosure option. I could read thousands of these letters, but let me just take a couple. John from Fairleigh, Vermont wrote, I am incensed over the Senate proposal to allow companies to put a barcode-style label on packaging that could be read by using a smartphone to determine GMO content. First, I don't even have a smartphone. I have no plans to buy one, since we have no cell reception where I live. And even if stores have Wi-Fi and are willing to buy a smartphone, why should I have to go the extra step of connecting to a company's website to determine if its product contains GMO? Well, John from Fairleigh makes a lot of sense. I mean, for example, Mr. President, suppose you have a peanut allergy. You can pick up most things labeled today, and it'll say whether it's got peanuts in it or not. Suppose you have a gluten allergy. You can go in a store and they'll have whole aisles full of gluten-free products, and they'll be labeled that way. Why shouldn't you be able to just look at a simple label? They print these labels new all the time for their products. Campbell's Soup is going to do it. Why can't we just have labels? I'll tell you what Catherine from Brattleboro, Vermont wrote. I'm one of the many people who cannot afford a cell phone. The federal proposal for GMO labels requires a cell phone would be useless to me and many others on fixed incomes, disability, and so on. Please pass a federal law. It doesn't require a cell phone to access information. I deserve to know what I'm consuming as much as people who have extra money can afford a cell. It just isn't fair to the rest of us to keep us in the dark. I pay my bills and live frugally and responsibly. I do not use my money for entertainment or extras, but I do not deserve to be restricted from access to important information. Well, this senator agrees with her. Others, like Carl from Putney and Barbara from Heinsberg, said, I don't use a smartphone. The label I have to scan will do me no good. I doubted I'd want to scan everything I looked at in my supermarket in any case. And then hundreds of Vermonters even joined in sending me a letter that said, the bill requires the labeling of packaged foods containing GMOs in one of three ways. An electronic code that consumers can scan, USDA-developed symbol, or a label. The bill leaves it to manufacturers to decide which of the three methods they prefer. Now, guess which method Big Food will choose. I have no doubt they'll choose the electronic code that can only be read with a scanner. They know that fewer will want to do this, and even fewer will be able to. Well, Mr. President, it's clear that the proposal before us today is driven more by the perspectives of powerful special interests than by a commitment to honor consumers' right to know or by a legitimate effort to make information available to all Americans. And I remain concerned that this legislation takes away the rights of Vermont, or actually any other state, to legislate in a way that advances public health and food safety, or informs consumers about potential environmental effects, avoids consumer confusion, protects religious traditions. I remain concerned the bill's definition of bioengineered foods has been written so narrowly that it allows some of the most common foods to go unlabeled. I remain concerned this bill allows for the use of electronic disclosure methods. In many rural parts of the country, that's the rural parts of the distinguished presiding officer, the rural parts of the distinguished senator from Oregon is on the floor, and including many parts of Vermont, we have significant technological challenges that make it nearly impossible for consumers to access electronic or digital disclosure methods allowed in this bill. And I remain concerned the proposal doesn't truly support a consumer's right to know. Consumers are an afterthought in the crafting of this deal. If we actually stay true to the kind of things most of us say in our campaigns and our political advertising, we say, we're there for you. We're there to protect you. We're there for you. Well, not so. You, the consumer, were an afterthought in the crafting of this deal. The prime motivation was to let large corporations get by with doing as little as possible. And the bill's lack of transparency is counterproductive. And I also remain concerned this proposal, even if you like the proposal, it has no enforcement mechanism. I have trouble believing the public pressure will be enough to force these multi-million-dollar corporations to comply 9 out of 10 consumers you'd think would be public pressure enough for the Congress to respond, but didn't do a single thing here. They were not going to make these multi-million-dollar corporations comply. This proposal makes consumers the cops in the beat, policing companies to provide information about the contents of their product. Well, these corporations show they don't really care what the consumers think. With some notable exception, Campbell Soup, a multi-billion-dollar corporation, is voluntarily labeling, and I applaud them for doing that. So many others are not. And since this proposal was unveiled, I've heard from many Vermonters who care deeply about this issue. Just last Friday, I joined several hundred Vermonters. I was in my hometown of Montpelier in Vermont, or on the State House lawn, and we celebrated Vermont's law, Act 120, taking effect on that day, July 1st. And I heard their voices loud and clear on this issue. The proposed deal before us falls short. It doesn't offer consumers what they need and what Vermont's legislature had in mind when they passed Act 120, a simple, clearly written, on-package label. I mean, all we want is a simple label. You look at it, you know what you have. Now, what Vermont did, unlike the United States Senate, which had no hearings, no open discussion, just had the Republican leader brought this bill out here under a fast track, so we couldn't have any real debate on it. What Vermont did, debated this issue for years. They held over 50 hearings on this subject. They had 130 witnesses. All sides of the issue were heard. Yet the U.S. Senate has failed to hold a single hearing on labeling, debate these issues, and hear expert testimony. Our little state of Vermont could have 50 hearings and 130 witnesses. Our legislature represents 625,000 people. We had 50 hearings, heard 130 witnesses. The Congress represents 325 million people. Didn't have time for a single hearing on labeling to debate these issues, to hear expert testimony. Not one single hearing where any of those 325 million Americans could be heard. You know, if you saw this in a movie or something where they're poking satirical fun at the Congress, you'd say, well, that's gone beyond. I mean, that would never happen. Unfortunately, it happened. The backroom deal made with the food industry has left too many gaping holes and questions. They should have been addressed before this bill was fast-tracked through the Senate. And I hope other senators will join me in rejecting these efforts. They undermine the ability of states like Vermont and Alaska and Virginia and others that choose to offer consumers and farmers purely factual, non-controversial, commercial information that furthers the legitimate and substantial interests of the state. So I really can't support this so-called compromise. There's been no hearings on it. There's been no testimony on it. It's suddenly handed to us like a fait accompli. We're told, take it or leave it. And after all, the big money interests want us to take it. It's a last-minute attack on Vermont's law. It's a last-minute attack on states' right to set priorities at the state government level. Instead of saying we'll cave to the lobbyists, we should be moving in a direction that offers consumers more information and more choices, rather than hiding behind a toothless law that sets industry interests ahead of a consumer's rights to know, sets wealthy interests ahead of consumers. Instead of an easy-to-read label, which everyone could understand, this deal substitutes a complicated scavenger hunt which most people won't complete. It's a sham. It is a sham. It is not letting people know what they need to know. It is a sham. Let's accept it. I mean, the Senate will vote one way or the other, but let's not have anybody go home and say you listened to consumers or you protected consumers. Instead, you voted for a sham put up by a few well-heeled corporate lobbyists. I've said it before. I'll say it again. 625,000 Vermonters deserve better. But even more importantly, 325 million Americans deserve better. They should at the very least have had a chance to have hearings, have people talk about it. Instead, written in the back rooms by lobbyists and corporate interests, heavily financed, we get this. Mr. President, I'm going to reserve the balance of the time, but I will first ask consent that my whole statement be included in the record.
Without objection.
And I reserve the balance of my time.